Hello and welcome. Using the most advanced AIs, we have created two characters. The first is Emma, an atheistic woman, 30 years old, a professor of philosophy, intellectual, intelligent, yet humorous. She presents a scientific philosophical atheist perspective. She speaks calmly and logically. The second is a theist, Daniel, a man around 35 years old, a theology researcher, thoughtful and rational. He believes in God, but not in a dogmatic way. He relies more on arguments and reasoning. He speaks respectfully, but firmly. They will engage in a debate and dialogue together. And finally, we asked several AIs to rate their arguments and rate them. Please stay with us as we begin the debate. Debates start with this question: where do you think the universe and life came from? Can the universe exist without a first cause?
Hello, I am Emma. If I had to sum it up in 2 minutes, I'd say there's no need for a supernatural first cause. Cosmological models like the Big Bang explain that our universe began about 13.8 billion years ago from a very hot, dense state. What came before that is still unknown, but quantum physics even allows for the possibility that space-time emerged from a kind of quantum vacuum. To me, saying everything must have a cause and then making an exception for God introduces a double standard. If we can exempt God and say he's uncaused, why not grant the same exemption to the universe or the laws of physics? The universe could exist without a conscious creator, not because we have all the answers, but because we don't need to insert a supernatural being to explain every unknown.
Hello, I'm Daniel. I think the idea of the universe existing without a first cause is like imagining an infinite chain of dominoes without anyone ever knocking over the first one. Even if we go back to the Big Bang, the question still remains, why is there something rather than nothing? The laws of physics and even a quantum vacuum still require an explanation. My belief is that behind this beginning lies a necessary reality, something uncaused, eternal, and self-existent. That's what we call God, not as a placeholder for gaps in science, but as the foundation of all reality. For me, the order, mathematics, and comprehensibility of the universe are signs that it's not the result of blind chance.
Is belief in God a psychological need or an objective reality?
I think belief in God is primarily a psychological and cultural phenomenon, not an objective fact about the universe. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. We naturally look for agency and intention behind events, even when there is none. That was an evolutionary advantage for our ancestors. If you hear rustling in the bushes, it's safer to assume something caused it. Over thousands of years, this tendency became woven into our myths, religions, and traditions. On top of that, belief in God provides comfort. It offers a sense of order, purpose, and moral grounding in a world that can feel chaotic and indifferent. It helps people cope with mortality and loss. None of this makes God real in an objective sense. It just makes the idea emotionally powerful. For me, reality is what exists regardless of whether we want it to be true or not. The fact that billions of people find comfort in the idea of God doesn't prove God's existence any more than the popularity of astrology proves that the stars guide our lives. So, I'd say belief in God meets human psychological needs, but that doesn't necessarily connect it to external, objective reality.
I agree that belief in God can meet deep psychological needs, but that doesn't mean it's only a psychological need. We can't dismiss something as unreal just because it comforts us. Food satisfies hunger, yet food is objectively real. The same could be true of God. The human yearning for the divine could itself be evidence of an objective reality we're meant to be in relationship with. From my perspective, the very depth and universality of this longing point towards something beyond us, Across cultures and eras, humans have independently arrived at some concept of the transcendent. If God were merely a cultural construct, it would be surprising to see such consistent themes emerging in societies that never interacted. And when I consider the philosophical arguments, the fine-tuning of the universe, the existence of moral values that seem binding regardless of opinion, they reinforce my belief that God is not just an inner projection. So yes, belief in God does meet psychological needs. But I see that as part of how we're wired, in a way that reflects an actual external creator.
Is the order and complexity of the universe evidence of intelligent design or the result of natural processes?
When we look at the universe, it's undeniably full of order and structure, from the laws of physics to the structure of DNA. No one can deny that. But to claim that this order necessarily comes from an intelligent designer is a hypothesis that requires independent evidence, not just an emotional reaction to the wonder of it all. In science, we've repeatedly seen that complexity can emerge from natural processes without conscious planning. In biology, for example, natural selection operating on random variation produces structures of astonishing functionality and elegance. An eye or a bird's wing isn't the product of a moment's design by an intelligent mind. It's the result of millions of years of small, accumulated changes. Similarly, in physics and chemistry, crystals, galaxies, and intricate patterns in clouds or rivers form without any conscious designer. They arise from simple rules operating under certain conditions, a phenomenon known in mathematics as emergence. The problem with the order equals designer reasoning is what's called the God of the gaps fallacy, using God to explain whatever we don't currently understand. History shows that these gaps shrink as we discover natural explanations. If today we say the fine-tuning of physical constants can only be explained by God, tomorrow we may have models that explain them naturally. Moreover, if we introduce a conscious designer as an explanation, we must also explain the designer. Where did that intelligence come from? If complexity requires a designer, then God would also need a designer, leading to an infinite regress. To me, the order and complexity of the universe are more compelling as evidence of the power of natural laws to produce astonishing structures, rather than as proof of a cosmic architect. It may not sound as romantic, but it's grounded in repeated observations from across the sciences.
I agree with Emma that natural laws can generate patterns and complexity, but the question is, where did these laws come from, and why are they so precisely tuned to produce such a magnificent universe? When we examine the physical constants, gravity, the electron's charge, the cosmological constant, we find that even the smallest change would make the universe uninhabitable. This is what's known as fine-tuning, and to me it's one of the strongest indicators of an intelligent designer. Imagine walking into a room and finding that the temperature, lighting, and every detail are perfectly adjusted for your comfort. Is your first thought that it happened by chance or that someone set it up? Of course, you could say luck, but the odds are so astronomically low that many theistic philosophers and scientists find design the far more reasonable conclusion. As for where did the designer come from, the difference is that in the theistic view, God is a necessary, uncaused, eternal being, not something that began to exist and therefore needs an explanation. This is fundamentally different from the material universe, which has a beginning and is subject to change. Also, the beauty and harmony of the laws of nature, the ability of our minds to comprehend them, and the presence of order at every scale, from subatomic particles to galactic clusters, seem to me to go beyond blind chance or brute necessity. Even if processes like natural selection are part of the picture, they themselves rest on the foundation of initial conditions and laws that are astonishingly life-permitting. That's why I see the universe's order and complexity not merely as the product of natural laws, but as the signature of an intelligent, purposeful designer.
Natural laws are like a language, and to me, language without an author makes no sense.
If God exists, why does he allow evil and suffering in the world?
In my view, the existence of evil and suffering is one of the strongest arguments against the existence of an all-good, all-knowing, and all-powerful God. If such a God existed, either he could stop evil but chooses not to, which would mean he's not truly benevolent, or he wants to but cannot, which would mean he's not omnipotent. Some believers argue that suffering is necessary for moral growth or for the exercise of free will. But that explanation doesn't account for many forms of suffering, like the endless pain of an infant or natural disasters that kill millions of living beings. These have nothing to do with moral development or free choice. From a scientific standpoint, evil and suffering arise from the neutral, impersonal processes of the universe. Tectonic plates shift and cause earthquakes, viruses evolve and cause disease, and creatures compete for survival. This pattern fits better with a universe that has no benevolent creator overseeing it.
The problem of evil is a profound challenge, even for believers. But I don't think the existence of evil is incompatible with God's existence. First, free will is a crucial part of what makes us human. If God removed all evil, real freedom would disappear, and we become programmed beings with no true choice. Second, some suffering allows for moral and spiritual growth. Courage, compassion, and self-sacrifice mean very little in a world without hardship. As for natural suffering, I believe we only see a small piece of the bigger picture. If God exists, there may be reasons beyond our current understanding for allowing such suffering, reasons that ultimately lead to a greater good in the long run. Faith, in this sense, is trusting in that ultimate good even when we can't yet see the whole plan.
Can morality remain stable without religion?
I believe morality can be sustained without religion because its roots lie in biology, evolution, and human experience. Cooperation, empathy, and fairness have offered survival and social advantages, which is why these tendencies became reinforced in our species. Moreover, philosophy and reason can ground moral principles on the basis of the consequences of actions and human rights, without appealing to a supernatural source. Many modern secular societies have low crime and corruption rates, while religion itself is no guarantee of moral behavior. To me, morality is most valuable when it comes from conscious choice and genuine empathy, not from fear of divine punishment or hope for eternal reward.
I think you can have rules and norms of morality without God, but it's difficult to maintain a truly stable and binding foundation for them. If morality is based only on social contracts or personal feelings, what stops them from shifting with changes in power or culture? Belief in God and an absolute moral source gives these principles a weight and permanence that go beyond individual preference or the majority's will. That's why many shared moral values, like justice or the sanctity of life, are rooted in religious texts and have endured across time and cultures. From my perspective, religion not only provides a philosophical foundation for morality, but also offers a deep motivation to live by it, even when it's hard or costly.
Are mystical and spiritual experiences real evidence or products of the human mind?
I think mystical and spiritual experiences are real in the sense that the person truly has them, but that doesn't mean they prove any supernatural reality behind them. Neuroscience has shown that such experiences can be triggered by changes in brain chemistry, deep meditation, sleep deprivation, or even electrical stimulation of specific brain regions. Feelings of unity with the universe, seeing lights, or hearing unusual sounds can all have biological explanations, similar to dreams or hallucinations. These experiences can be profound and inspiring, but their vividness doesn't make them proof of contact with a divine being or a spiritual realm. For me, the value of these experiences lies in the impact they have on a person's life and emotions, not in their ability to demonstrate the existence of God or the supernatural.
I believe mystical and spiritual experiences can be genuine encounters with a reality beyond ourselves. Of course, some may be products of brain processes, but dismissing them all as hallucinations is like saying that because our brains can produce visual perception, all visual images must be fake. Across cultures or religions, people have reported remarkably similar experiences, feelings of a higher presence, deep peace, or unconditional love, even when they had no contact with one another. To me, this similarity suggests there may be a shared reality behind them. I think mystical experiences, especially when they lead to moral growth and lasting positive change, can serve as meaningful evidence of contact with the divine.
Religion's role in human civilization, driver of progress or obstacle to freedom.
Religion has played a dual role throughout history. On one hand, in early societies, it helped create social cohesion, shape laws, and foster a shared identity. Many historical monuments, works of art, and even early centers of education were established by religious institutions. But this positive influence doesn't necessarily mean religion has always been a driving force for progress. On the other hand, religion has often been a barrier to freedom of thought and inquiry. Scientific censorship, trials of thinkers, discrimination against certain groups, and religious wars are all part of the long history of faith. When religious beliefs are presented as absolute, unquestionable truth, the potential for scientific and social growth is diminished. In my view, genuine progress happens when positive human values, like solidarity, justice, and scientific curiosity, are freed from dogma and authoritarianism. Religion can inspire, but only when it coexists with freedom of thought and the willingness to be questioned, not when it places itself above scrutiny. In my view, genuine progress happens when positive human values, like solidarity, justice, and scientific curiosity, are freed from dogma and authoritarianism. Religion can inspire, but only when it coexists with freedom of thought and the willingness to be questioned, not when it places itself above scrutiny.
I believe religion has been essential in shaping human civilization and driving its progress. Many of the first universities, hospitals, and legal systems were influenced or founded by religious beliefs. Religion has inspired great works of art, magnificent architecture, and powerful movements for justice. Even many great scientists of the past saw their research as part of understanding the Creator. Of course, it's undeniable that religion has sometimes been misused by individuals or institutions seeking power, becoming a tool for oppression and restricting freedoms. But I see this as a failure of human interpretation and misuse, not of religion as a divine ideal. In my view, when religion functions in its truest sense, cultivating love, truth-seeking, and service to others, it is not an obstacle to freedom, but rather gives freedom its deepest meaning. Religion can be the force that keeps moral purpose alive within scientific and cultural progress, ensuring that advancement doesn't devolve in the mere accumulation of power or wealth.
If a holy book is divine, why are there contradictions and disagreements in religious texts?
I think the contradictions and differences in religious texts are strong evidence that these books are products of human culture and thought, not a flawless, direct revelation from a perfect being. They were written over different periods, in different places, by multiple authors with distinct backgrounds, languages, and concerns. It's only natural that stories, laws, and even the portrayal of God would change across sections. Moreover, Many of these books were transmitted orally for generations before being written down, a process that inevitably led to alterations, omissions, and additions. We can observe historical, geographical, and even scientific inconsistencies within them. If these books truly originated from an all-knowing, perfect God, we would expect complete harmony without contradictions. The fact that we find such discrepancies suggests to me that they reflect the culture and social conditions of their time far more than they convey an unmediated message from a supernatural source.
I acknowledge that religious texts contain parts that seem contradictory or different, but I don't think this necessarily indicates weakness or that they are purely human-made. First, it's important to note that these books employ various literary forms: poetry, parable, historical narrative, and legal codes, each of which communicates truth in a different way. These stylistic differences can be misunderstood as contradictions when read superficially. Second, many apparent discrepancies arise from translation differences, variations in manuscripts, or the inherent limitations of human language in expressing divine realities. When infinite truth is conveyed through finite words, differences in understanding are bound to occur. Finally, I see the multiple perspectives of the authors like different witnesses to the same event. Each gives part of the truth, and together they offer a fuller picture. For me, this diversity points to the richness and multidimensional nature of revelation, not its imperfection.
If there is no God, what is the origin of the fixed laws of nature?
I believe the laws of nature are descriptions we create to capture the recurring, predictable patterns we observe in the universe, not commands issued by some higher authority. These patterns arise from the inherent properties of matter, energy, and the structure of space-time. For example, the law of gravity simply describes how masses interact. It doesn't require a supernatural being to decree it. Modern physics suggests that many of these laws could emerge from the initial conditions of the universe and the fundamental properties of particles. The question of why those properties are the way they are is still open, but ignorance of the ultimate cause doesn't automatically point to the need for a creator.
I think the precise order and stability of the laws of nature are hard to explain as purely accidental or self-generated. These laws are mathematical and universal, as if they were designed in advance to make the universe coherent and predictable. This remarkable harmony, especially in the fine-tuning of physical constants, points to me toward an intelligent and purposeful source. From a theistic perspective, these laws reflect the will and order of God, who created the universe with a structure that intelligent beings could understand. That's why, in my view, science and faith are not in conflict. Rather, science is possible precisely because God established a stable, intelligible framework for the cosmos.
Why doesn't an all-powerful God make his existence clear and unambiguous to everyone?
If an all-powerful and benevolent God exists, we would expect him to provide clear, unmistakable, and observable evidence so that all people could believe without doubt. In reality, however, evidence for God is ambiguous and open to multiple interpretations, and people across different cultures and religions hold widely different beliefs. This situation looks more like the absence of clear evidence than purposeful hiddenness. Some argue that God hides himself so that true faith can exist, but I think this logic is flawed. If God truly wants people to know him and be close to him, the most effective way would be to make his existence obvious to everyone. In the absence of such evidence, it's natural for many to conclude that such a God likely does not exist, or at least has no intention of revealing himself plainly.
From my perspective, the reason God doesn't reveal himself in an unmistakable and physical way to everyone is that a relationship with God is not merely a matter of intellectual acknowledgement. It's a matter of the heart and will. If God made his existence undeniable through overwhelming displays, genuine freedom to accept or reject him would be diminished, and faith would become a compelled reaction. Moreover, God communicates through signs, personal experiences, nature, and the human conscience, not only through direct, spectacular manifestations. This approach allows us to seek, question, and freely choose to move toward him. In my view, this partial hiddenness is an invitation to a deeper, more conscious relationship, rather than evidence of his absence.
If science one day explains the origin of everything, would belief in God become meaningless?
In my view, if science were to fully explain the origin of the universe, the laws of nature and life with precise evidence and complete models, there would no longer be a need to invoke a supernatural creator. History shows that as science advances, the areas once explained by God have consistently shrunk. Some theists argue that God is still the source of those laws and initial conditions, but if all of this can be explained through natural, testable processes, then the God hypothesis becomes more of an unnecessary addition. At that point, belief in God would likely remain as a personal philosophical or spiritual choice rather than a necessary explanation for the universe.
From my perspective, the reason God doesn't reveal himself in an unmistakable and physical way to everyone is that a relationship with God is not merely a matter of intellectual acknowledgement. It's a matter of the heart and will. If God made his existence undeniable through overwhelming displays, genuine freedom to accept or reject him would be diminished, and faith would become a compelled reaction. Moreover, God communicates through signs, personal experiences, nature, and the human conscience, not only through direct, spectacular manifestations. This approach allows us to seek, question, and freely choose to move toward him. In my view, this partial hiddenness is an invitation to a deeper, more conscious relationship, rather than evidence of his absence.
The debate has come to an end. Both participants scored the maximum points, but the atheist side took the lead. Thank you for staying with us until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let us know in the comments if you'd like to see more debates like this.